Bukhara was founded in the 6th century BC and was to become known as the holiest city in the region. It became a centre of trade lying on the Silk Road and was known as a city of incomparable splendour and wealth. Originally part of the Persian Empire, it fell to the Mongols and then to Genghis Khan. In 1506, the Khanate of Bukhara came into existence with the acquisition of Samarkand. As early as 1791, Catherine the Great had designs on Bukhara. Then in 1801, the tyrannical Tsar Paul I launched an expedition to take Bukhara and Khiva, which had to be aborted when he was assassinated. The aims were to free Russian slaves taken during caravan raids and to provide a platform for an advance into India. The rivalry for influence in Central Asia between Russia and Britain, with the activities of spies and intelligence officers and expeditionary forces, the Great Game had begun. In 1825, a British contingent reached Bukhara under an official of the East India Company, a vet called William Moorcroft. He was seeking the fabled Turkoman steeds, renowned for their speed and stamina, and new markets for British goods which were superior to the corresponding Russian ones. Elation at being the first Europeans to enter the Holy City quickly turned into disappointment when they heard the cries of the children. Urus, Russians! They had beaten him by 4 years. Moorcroft was well received, but did not find his horses and departed, returning across the Oxus River. He was never seen again. In 1829, the Russians drove south and east, defeating the Turks, gaining them freedom to trade all over the Ottoman Empire. The Russophobes in Britain clamoured even more loudly that their ally in the fight against Napoleon was no longer trustworthy. Wellington was now Prime Minister and was under pressure, and Lieutenant Alexander Burnes was granted permission to gather intelligence, travelling from Kabul through the passes of the Hindu Kush, across the Oxus River and on to Bukhara. In June 1832 he entered Bukhara in local garb and was summoned to the Arkor fortress. He proceeded on foot as it was forbidden for non-Muslims to ride in the holy city. He struck up a friendship with the vizier, whose function effectively was that of Prime Minister, but he did not meet the newly installed Emir, the notorious Nasrallah. Diplomatically he answered questions about religion. What does pork taste like? It's mainly the poor who eat pork. I'm told it tastes like beef. He stayed a month, gleaning intelligence, even meeting one of the 100 or so Russian slaves. He departed, leaving one of his compasses for the vizier. Bring me back a pair of English spectacles, he was requested, if he returned. In 1838, Colonel Charles Stoddart was dispatched to meet the Emir, to reassure him that Britain had no ill intention, and to hold out the possibility of a treaty. As was suggested to Khiva, if the Russian slaves were released, the Russians would have no excuse to attack Bukhara. Unaware of Oriental customs, he rode into Bukhara in full military uniform, and did not dismount, and saluted the Emir from his saddle. The Emir did not acknowledge him, and he was taken and thrown into a 20-foot deep pit, inhabited by vermin. Nasrallah might have thought him to be a possible spy, but he had possibly murdered his older brother to become Emir, so it was in keeping with his behaviour. To save his life, Stodart accepted the offer to adopt the Islamic faith. When Kabul surrendered to the British, Nasrallah took a more serious view of Britain's strength, and life improved for Stoddart. Now he was placed under house arrest. From this relative comfort, he renounced Islam. Palmerston was now Foreign Secretary, and with Britain fully occupied in Afghanistan, he was loath to order a rescue mission. However, in Central Asia was Intelligence Officer Arthur Conolly, and it was he who coined the term the Great Game. He was on a mission to unite the local powers of Khiva, Bukhara and Kokand against the Russians, and to free any Russian slaves. Believing Stoddart's standing to be elevated, he was enticed to enter Bukhara in November 1841. Nasrallah sought direct contact with what he saw as his equal, Queen Victoria, but a note from Palmerston carried by Conolly described the two Britons merely as private travellers. With this snub, Nasrallah imprisoned both as spies. Meanwhile, Burnes of Bukhara perished in the defeat of the British in November 1841 in Afghanistan. This defeat proved to Nasrallah that Britain was no longer a regional power, and attention in Britain was no longer focused towards freeing the Bukhara victims. With no reply from Queen Victoria forthcoming, the two were thrown back into the hole. They were taken to the square in front of the Ark where the Emir had his palace. They were forced to dig their own graves, and Stodart was the first to be executed. Conolly was given the offer to convert to Islam, but the devout Christian pointed out that it had not saved Stodart, and he accepted his fate. In 1865, the Russians were to occupy Tashkent and then turn their attentions towards Bukhara. Samarkand fell 3 years later, and after further defeats the Emir of Bukhara surrendered. He was left on the throne but was powerless. Khiva was to fall a few years later, and Khiva and Bukhara were to remain under Russian control until the breakup of the Russian Empire.